Life is, I experience life in a directional way too. It is about what direction you're heading in. So if it's getting better as opposed to worse, then I guess that's cause for being happy. So
look at this face. I'm happy.
That's right. The perfect face for discussing the Holodomor myth. That article was interesting on at least a couple of levels. One was it gave us some insight as to what it's like for you to be living with this kill list hanging over you. Or there's two lists, actually. Blacklist, kill list, whatever you call it. There's two lists where you and others have been targeted for nothing more than expressing your opinion. And then the question became, well, what was it that the guy encountered you about? And so we learned about the Holodomor myth. Now, how do you pronounce it? We just played that video from Radio Free Europe, so I'm just pronouncing it the way that announced it.
I'm positive that they're pronouncing it correct.
Okay.
I can guarantee you that if left to my own devices, I would mispronounce it because I tend to butcher the Russian language or any Slavic language every time I attempt. So don't rely upon me as a source. Remember, I'm the guy who made an experienced elite Russian linguist instructor cry in shame for betraying her country because she couldn't get me to speak conversational Russian before they deployed me to the Soviet Union. I broke the system. I'm that bad of a linguist.
All right. But you did your research on that, and we saw the results of it in this article. So
it's not about doing the research. I mean, let's be honest. I knew.
You already knew about it?
Well, I bought this book when it first came out. Harvest of Sorrow, Robert Conquest, 1986. I mean, this is what I do. I'm not just a Russian history major. I'm passionate about Russia and Russian history. So when these books come out, I read them. And then I do something really cool. I read them. And then I reread them and read them again. And then I go through the footnotes and find out the sources that they put. And I read the sources. And I go to the Library of Congress to dig up. I mean, so I'm not some sort of 5-week wonder. And you know why that term, 5-week wonder, because that's what I was dealing with, a 5-week wonder. A guy who went to Ukraine for 5 weeks and immersed himself in the propaganda of the Ukrainian nationalists, and then felt obliged to confront me.
Well, people can read all the details in the article, but just so they know what we're talking about, you walked into this event a bit early, and this guy gave you the creep, so to speak. He acted a bit too aggressive, and you thought, well, I wonder if this is somebody who might do something a little crazy.
Well, it wasn't that. I mean, he jams this in my face. All right. And there's a couple things. Look, black and red.
Mm-hmm.
Slava Ukraini. Okay, I'm on a hit list by people who like the color black and red, who use the term Slava Ukraini as their war cry. And so this guy is sitting there, and I'm not a paranoid person, but you've got to read a room when you get in there. And I read the room, and this guy was sitting there, and I'm going, this is problematic, because I've done lots of these speaking engagements. And I will tell you that people who want to be there when I walk in make eye contact, smile. They want to stand up, shake my hand, talk. The last thing they do is sit there and scowl. And he's wearing this big overcoat, and you can hide a lot of stuff in an overcoat. And so I'm just looking at him going, this, it's like that old Sesame Street song, one of these things is not like the other. He was the one that was not like the other. And and then let me put this in context. I wrote this story for a couple of reasons. One, to put context to why I'm discussing the Holodomor out of the blue. But two, I feel like I owe the peace activists at Ann Arbor some insight into why I blew my stack. Because
they're not used to their speakers dropping F-bombs left and right and threatening to kill people or anything like that.
Well, I mean, they have to understand that they created this problem. He was there. They brought him to me very forcefully, and he jams this thing in my face. And I don't know what he's got in his hands. I don't know what here. So, I have to take measures to protect myself. And I opted that the best thing was to step toward him to limit his options. And And, and then he got aggressive, and you don't get aggressive with Marines. This is just a pro tip, people. If you want to deal with me, be calm. I'll listen to anything you have to say. You want to get aggressive, I do aggressive better than you do aggressive. That's a 100% guarantee. And he tried to get aggressive, and, fortunately, no violence ensued. But I do remember the organizer getting on the phone to one of her colleagues. But he was so great last night. I don't know what's going on.
He snapped.
He went crazy. Well, don't put a Bandera assassin in front of me,
or a would-be Bandera. By the way,
I don't know who he is. It turned out he's just a left-wing fanatic who bought into Ukrainian propaganda. But when you're labeled an information terrorist, when when your government funds the labeling you as an information terrorist with an emphasis on terrorist and being remedied by being arrested as a war criminal, and you're on a government-sponsored liquidation list.
No, I get it. I
don't know if he's going to be.
You put two things together very logically. That's not paranoia. You remember you're on the list, and you have a guy in front of you who's acting hostile. By the way, lest you be concerned, I'm wearing a leather jacket tonight, not because I'm hiding a weapon in it, but because it's a little chilly where I am. So
I'm just saying, Jeff.
Don't headbutt me through the.
Don't make me step forward.
I know you could snap just like that at any moment. All right, so that's why you addressed that issue, and then
it's not like that. It's slower.
Oh, sorry.
There's arthritis.
Let's not give away too much because we want people to go to scottritterextra.com to read it. But basically, what's the myth?
Well, first of all, let's understand that the word that's being used, tossed out there, the Holodomor, is a manufactured word. It is a word that was made up in the late 1980s by Ukrainian nationalists who were trying to create a justification for separation of Ukraine from the Soviet Union, to break the bonds, historical bonds that existed between the Ukrainian people and Moscow, the Ukrainian people and the Russians. So there was this famine. The famine is not a myth. It really happened. Millions of people died. It's one of the great tragedies of any age, any era. So I'm not trying to say that the famine didn't happen. I'm not trying to say that there wasn't mismanagement by Stalin and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that this wasn't targeted genocide of the Ukrainian people. That's insane. This was a famine that killed up to 12 million people.
And they weren't all Ukrainians either, right?
No.
Yeah.
I want to say,
even
5 million maximum were Ukrainians. Maybe 3, maybe 2. We don't know because, it's hard to count bodies that aren't accounted for properly. A lot of these numbers are demographic guesswork by Western scholars coming in afterwards, looking at, the unborn, meaning how many.
Oh yeah, in that video that we opened with, it said 3 to 12 million people perished. That's quite a big difference. 3 to 12.
It's a huge difference. But the point is, a lot of people died. Some of them were Ukrainian. A lot of them were Ukrainian, but not all of them were Ukrainian. And it wasn't targeted genocide. That's the point I'm trying to make. It was a tragedy. If you want to condemn the Soviet system, feel free. Condemn away. But to say that Stalin purposefully singled out the Ukrainians for genocide is absurd in the extreme. And yet, in the late 1980s, the Ukrainian nationalists, who are now recognizing that Ukraine could become independent, a perestroika is happening. They want to separate themselves from the Soviet Union, from Russia. They need something that generates hate. That's literally what they're trying to do. They're trying to generate hate. And so they invented this word, Holodomor. They invented it. It didn't exist prior to that. In 1982, the word didn't exist. In 1972, didn't exist. It didn't exist at the time of the famine. It was manufactured by Ukrainian nationalists in the late 1980s. That's the myth. The myth
Right.
that the famine.
So the non-existent genocidal intent is now being ascribed to Putin. So it's
right.
Well, there's a myth on top of a myth, right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
so
regardless of Stalin's motives, how do you wind up with that being Putin's motive?
Well, apparently this is a continuation of the Holodomor, of Vladimir Putin's genocidal attempt to eradicate the Ukraine. But the irony is the only people who are carrying out cultural genocide today in that area are the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are the ones who are denying the Russian religion, denying the Russian language, Russian culture. I mean, they're angry that people in the West dare watch a Russian movie, dare watch a Russian play, dare listen to Russian music. They're furious at this. Why? That's called cultural genocide. That's what the Ukrainians are doing. The Ukrainians are the ones who call the Russians orcs. They treat them as subhumans. I mean, they literally capture these people, saran wrap them to a pole, paint their faces green, and leave them to die. Yay, Ukraine. So this is the myth that the Russians are carrying out some sort of continued genocide against Ukraine is a 100% myth. And
is
that's
genocidal culture a phrase you coined, or is that a phrase that's
cultural genocide is a
phrase that's out there already?
It's a legitimate phrase that people 456 times smarter than me came up with and have extrapolated.
Well, it'd be perfectly fine if you invented. I was just curious if it's been out there.
I'm not clever enough. I'm working on it.
All right. So we're on tonight because tomorrow night Scott is in the Bethlehem Public Library. Let's see. I think I actually have that here. So we don't want to deprive you of your weekly dose of the cocktail night, even though it's Thursday. I've got my usual glass of wine, and Scott
Portuguese
has
wine?
Come again?
Portuguese wine?
No, this is actually a California blend.
Wow. So you lost your wine advisor? What happened?
I just mix it up every week. That's right.
Okay.
Somebody said I should tout the wine, and then maybe somebody will give me free wine. And
that's why I'm basically thinking that, Jeff, you should come up with a wine list.
Yeah,
Jeff's wine list, market it.
That's a good idea.
Thanks. Right, I get 10%.
You get 10% of the wine. I'll pay you now.
I don't drink wine, so it's like 0%.
Right. S. Anderson from Irvine, California, has our first question of the night. It appears Patriot missile batteries will be in Ukraine soon. Is the name Patriot supposed to scare Vladimir Putin? Do you suppose he was expecting this move? And do you think he has an ace up his sleeve to counter the Patriots?
Well, first of all, I don't think the term Patriot was supposed to scare Vladimir Putin. The missile has been called the Patriot since it came into service back in the late 1980s. The Patriot system has a very checkered past, so to speak. Its first combat deployment was in the Gulf War, 1991, where it performed abysmally in its anti-missile role, failing to shoot down any Scuds. I know Raytheon, I keep begging Raytheon to sue me, because then we can do discovery and we'll get all the evidence out there, but they won't, because they know the truth. The truth is that the Patriot system didn't work. Couldn't shoot down Scuds. During the second Gulf War in 2003, the Patriot was very good at shooting down Allied aircraft, not very good at shooting down anything else. And more recently, the Patriot missile failed to stop Houthi drones, Iranian-made drones that the Houthi forces in Yemen used to attack, Saudi infrastructure, including a major Aramco oil field. So the call the Patriot a super weapon is ridiculous. Does it have capabilities? I would say that in the hands of well-trained, highly trained troops operating as part of an integrated air defense structure, that the Patriot could provide reasonable air defense against near peer opponents. But here's the problem with the Patriot. It's been deployed a lot. It's been, so every time it's deployed, every time the radar goes up, every time they activate, the Russians are collecting intelligence on it. They know the footprint. They know how the radar works. They know everything about the missile system. And the Russians aren't the kind of people that just sit back there and go, oh, that's interesting. We're not going to do anything about that. They are actively developing counters to the Patriot, because at some point in time, they may very well be called upon to go to war against the Patriot system. So the Russians are fully prepared to do this. You know who's not prepared to handle the Patriot? The Ukrainians. It takes a minimum of 5 months to train a Patriot operator. Now, that's just basic training. That just basically says you now can get out there and get in the radar van, the command van, the missiles, and work as a team to learn how to do this proficiently. That just gets you in the door. Then you have to train. You have to go out on field exercises. It's not school work where you come out and there's the missile thing in the field, nice and neat, and you come out and everything's copacetic. Now, here's the deal, dude. It's snowing. It's raining. There's bad atmospherics. Have you actually trained what happens when one of your own electronic warfare aircraft starts jamming signals, sending a false image to your radar screen? Do you know how to separate that? These are real world things that have confounded highly trained U.S. Patriot crews over the years, and we still don't have the solution. Back in, I think as recently as 2008, 2009, the U.S. Army was saying, we're not training our people properly. The people we train are going out there and they can't handle the system. It's too complicated. And now we're going to take Ukrainians, give them 5 months training, put them straight into combat with the Patriot. That's called suicide, because the Patriot does a couple things. One, it emits a radar signal. When you emit a signal, the enemy intercepts the signal. Then they have capabilities to target the signal. There's a huge footprint. It takes 90 men or women to man a Patriot battery. 90.
Wow,
You
I
can
would have
do
never
the same.
guessed that many.
Say again?
I would have never guessed that many.
It takes 90 people. Now you have the S-300 system, which is sort of the Soviet era equivalent of the Patriot. You can do this. You can man the same level of capability with 30, 1/3 of the manpower. And so now the Ukrainians have to, produce 90 people, send them to the United States, by the way. I don't know where 7th Army is going to train them. Normally they go to Fort Bliss and they go to White Sands. They get some training. That's what we did with the Israelis back in the Gulf War. Maybe the Army's got some sort of specialized training they can gin up in Germany. The South Carolina National Guard has developed its own training program for the National Guard to have proficiency. So I'm sure the U.S. military is going to come up with some sort of training scheme for these guys. But you can't take a shortcut here, because if you do, the system doesn't work. And you die. I mean, this isn't a game, people.
I saw on the news today. Did you see Putin said that if they go ahead with this threat to send the missiles over, that the Putin said there will be consequences? Did you see
that? I did see it. They've said that for some time. Mm-hmm. This does represent here's the risk to the Russians. That, for instance, we now know the Germans have deployed 2 Patriot batteries into Poland, right along the Polish-Ukrainian border. This means that the Patriot radars extend their coverage into Ukrainian soil, and the missiles likewise now. So now there is a de facto NATO air defense umbrella extending into Western Ukraine. Very dangerous situation, because any Russian aircraft entering there, if they get painted by the NATO radar, can assume that that's a hostile act, and therefore they're legitimately allowed to, under self-defense, take out the radar. How stupid can you be? The answer, very stupid. But now we take these U.S. systems, even with Ukrainian crews, and we put them into Ukraine proper. Are they going to communicate with each other? Because here's the thing. Remember I told you about radars emit signals and get detected and fire? What if the Ukrainian fire batteries are linked to the NATO radar? Now, because same system. We know we have, so they create communications connectivity, and the NATO radar is designating Russian aircraft for the Ukrainian missiles to fire. This is the kind of insanity that I'm sure people are thinking about, and it will turn the German Patriot systems in Poland into active combatants in the conflict in Ukraine. And I think this is what Putin's talking about. The consequences will be that if they seek to do some sort of integration like this, they're going to take out the German batteries, take them right out. They're also going to, I think, actively target. When the Russians say needs some protection in Ukraine, very cute, Gavin. He's referring to that S-300 that actually landed in Poland the other day. The Russians have always said that when they respond, it will be asymmetrical. It doesn't have to be symmetrical, meaning they a like for a like.
It could be a greater force than was used against them.
Right. But, it also could be that the Russians will use unconventional warfare. Maybe some special operations will go into areas where the training is taking place, where the equipment is being assembled prior to shipment into Poland to interdict it on the other side of the border in a deniable fashion. We'll see what happens. Putin doesn't bluff. That's one thing I will say that people should listen to. So when he says that there will be a response, there will be a response.
I would think you could apply the same philosophy if somebody were to attack you on the street or at an event. You're not required to respond with the exact same degree of force. Maybe it'll be more force, right? And if somebody starts,
more force.
What's that?
It'll be more force.
Exactly.
You don't allow these things because first of all, you don't know if there's other people.
Mm-hmm.
You got to assume that there's backup. So what do I want to get? I want to get in a 15-second, 20-second fist fight with this guy? No, he's going down in 3 to 4 seconds, and I'm ready for the next person. I mean, that's just the way it works.
I thought I'd do you that favor and everybody take that as a warning. So this is a follow-up to our Tuesday episode when Scott said he didn't have an answer, but he would look into it. And Kevin Michelizzi, our information warfare specialist, said he's not going to find the answer. So let's find out. Hold on a sec. That's not it.
You set me up for the wrong question. There we go.
That's it. Well, sorry about that. Can you tell me how much the U.S. Department of Defense spends per year on information warfare or propaganda? I heard $80 billion. However, after doing my own research, I could only find something like between 4.7 and 9 billion.
Well, Kevin, I did do the research. I actually read the speeches of all the various information officers in the U.S. Air Force, Army, Navy, Space Force. And here's the thing. The budget, $80 billion, that's a big budget. That's a huge budget. And one of the reasons why I think it's that big is that information warfare isn't just about propaganda. The term information warfare actually is a little bit more complicated in that it's the informationalization of warfare. That's the term that came straight out of the Chief Information Officer of the United States Air Force's speech. It's about the technologies that are involved in information management, information security, things of that nature. So it goes beyond propaganda into the architectures. Artificial intelligence plays a role in this. So that 80 billion could include the research and development into artificial intelligence. So I think the problem is the terminology, that if we talk about information warfare, the Department of Defense and indeed the United States has a broader definition of what that means. It goes beyond simply propaganda. If we speak of propaganda, the budget shrinks considerably because now we're into active measures and we can identify specific elements within the CIA, State Department, Homeland Security, Department of Defense that do information warfare propaganda type stuff, our psychological operations battalions, certain cyber groups that do, we have our own version of bot farms where we're out there, infiltrating chat rooms and things, putting ideas out there. The CIA used to do some very interesting things back in the 50s and the 60s. They had a magazine called, I think, Encounter magazine, that was operated, I believe, out of England, CIA funded, but they had some of the top progressive left intellectuals, and the purpose was to engage intellectually with the Soviets, to try and win over the European progressive movement, to wean them away from communism. But it wasn't about disinformation. It was about just who could have the better intellectual argument. I don't think we're that sophisticated today. I don't think we're having that kind of stuff. I think we're much cruder. But that's it. So the budget, I think the numbers that the gentleman put up there, the single digit billions, even though that's a lot of money, that's probably a very accurate reflection of the propaganda aspect of information warfare. That larger number, the 80 billion, gets into technology, the architecture, and things of that nature.
All right. So it was important to define what you're talking about. Otherwise, people won't know whether or not, they won't know how to assess it unless you first define whatever it is you're talking about. Does that make sense? I mean, in my head it did. I don't know if it came out of my mouth making sense. All right.
I have another glass of wine, Jeff. It'll help.
Yeah. Yeah. W from the Netherlands. Can you explain how those pedal mines on the rooftops work? Doesn't a person have to step on it, or do they randomly get blown off the roof by the wind or by a bird?
Well, the pedal mines that you're referring to is this. It's a Russian manufactured, Soviet manufactured, like a cluster munition. So basically artillery shells or rocket shells, they'll have a warhead, and inside will be a sleeve, and then packed in there are these, they call butterfly mines, these petals that look like little wings. And the warhead will open up, and these things will spin and flutter around. And the spinning of it will actually, if it spins enough, will activate the fuse, so that when it hits, it's active, it's ready. So if somebody steps on it, it'll blow off your foot, kill you, maim you, etc. So the idea is to scatter them over the ground and have people step on them. They get on rooftops because if you drop them in an urban area, they'll get on the rooftop. They'll get, they'll go wherever they land. They land in trees, they land in shrubs, and that's a hazard because you're looking for them on the ground. They're up there, the wind blows, suddenly they drop to the ground and you step on them. It's not just this. During the Gulf War, we dropped cluster bombs all over Iraq. And I remember we were spending the night in this facility that had been attacked during the war, and we were bedding down there for the night. And they had a tin roof, and we're inside, and the wind's blowing. And all of a sudden, you hear, and then, and about 6 cluster bombs fall on the ground right in front of us, and we're like, "Whoa!" And we were surrounded by cluster munitions. It just came out of off the woodwork. Very dangerous stuff. We actually had to tackle an Iraqi who was picking it up and started throwing it to his friends playing catch, not understanding that every time you threw it, you're getting one more gyration, rotation in the fusing mechanism, and that at some point it's going to go live, catch it, and boom. So they were throwing it, and we actually tackled the guy. He was a soldier with a weapon, and his other soldiers were coming up, getting ready to shoot us, and we're like, "Stop! This thing will kill you." It's real, and it's right now, supposed to be outlawed. There are, I guess, measures taken to ban these things. They're not totally banned. Nations have voluntarily agreed not to use them. The Russians don't use them. I believe they stopped using them, but the Ukrainians have them. They're using them extensively, and they're using them in civilian areas. This is literally a weapon of terror designed to not to bring harm to Russian forces, but to terrorize the population of the Donbass, to punish them for daring to seek to separate from Ukraine.
Tori put up a comment from someone saying that I need to be more active on Twitter. And that's probably true, especially since only one of us actually has an account on Twitter the moment.
At the moment.
The other has one coming back soon. Scott, I have a voicemail message here from a woman who sounds like a lovely person. What?
Let me just check real quick.
Yeah, I know what you're going to do. He's going to check his Twitter.
I'm still banned, Jeff. I'm still banned. Okay,
still
go
banned.
ahead.
Okay, all right. Here's a voicemail message from Marilyn in Richmond, California. Perk up your ears, Scott. This is an audio presentation.
Hi, Scott. This is Marilyn Langlois from Richmond, California. I really appreciate your analyses. Thank you. My question is about Nord Stream 2. I recall hearing that it had 2 strings and only one of them was damaged by the sabotage explosion. Do you know of anyone, anywhere, on any side, talking about putting the undamaged string of Nord Stream 2 into operation? Thanks.
Good question. And she's 100% correct. There are 2 pipelines, pipelines which combined, I think 15 billion cubic meters of gas capability, or no, 50. I don't know. I'll have to do the research on that. But each one, I think, is, they evenly split. So it's like 25, 26 billion cubic meters capacity. Both Nord Stream 1 streams were taken out. But on Nord Stream 2, it turns out that only one was taken out. One is still functional. So theoretically, the Russians have the ability to supply to Germany, around 25 billion cubic meters of natural gas. The Russians have kept saying, we could turn it on anytime you want us to. But it's not happening. Germany is no longer asking for that. Russia's no longer offering, and the European Council continues to have laws that prohibit the operation of the Nord Stream 2 surviving pipeline.
One of the comments said, does Scott know his videos go viral on TikTok? Are you aware of that? That's the question.
I'm finding out now. I don't, I'm not a TikTok person, but does that mean somebody's editing it? Am I doing a dance? What's going on? I mean,
I don't know. But I do know that Marco Rubio just came up with a bill seeking to ban TikTok. So there goes your audience on TikTok.
Oh, no.
It was great while it lasted.
Yeah.
Maria from Bulgaria, please explain the role of the Wagner Group in Africa and its impact in the Ukraine conflict.
The Wagner Group was formed in 2014 as a vehicle for the Russians to provide professional military expertise in support of the pro-Russian separatists of the Donbass in Lugansk and Donetsk. Because constitutionally, Russia wasn't allowed to deploy Russian forces into that area. I'm sure some did go in. I know some went in, but they weren't supposed to do it, and it created some political problems for the Russians. So the Donetsk separatists, the Donbass separatists, were a amalgam of, and again, I might have fumbled that word too. Amalgam, maybe.
Amalgam? No, hold on.
Is it? I think I threw in an extra syllable there. I think it's amalgam. This is what happens when Marines read. We think we know the word, but we don't actually say it right. But it's going to be a collection of people of varying skill sets. You had some like I think Khodakovsky, who was a former Special Forces police officer, and his battalion, or at least a certain number of his battalion, came in and they formed a professional group. But these were cops. These weren't assault troops. These weren't frontline infantry. You had people that had prior military experience. You had people that never had any military experience coming together, and they were fighting and fighting bravely, but they were dying in large numbers because war is war. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to die. So Wagner was created as a vehicle to bring in this expertise on a contract basis. That's why it's called a private military contract. Now, under Russian law, you're not allowed to have a PMC. There's no Russian law that authorizes a PMC. In fact, there's a number of Russian laws that forbid this kind of activity. But Wagner was created by the Russian General Staff. This is a big deal. This isn't some sort of, people say, oh, this is Prigozhin's Putin's chef who is in charge of Wagner. But this is an adjunct of the Russian General Staff. It's a strategic capability designed to, it was created to stiffen up the Donbass militias with professional combat capabilities. So what they would do is take contract soldiers and maybe end their contract with the Russian military and sign a new contract with Wagner. But remember, when these guys do something heroic, they get Russian medals. They get the same medals you would get if you're in the service. You're just getting paid through a different vehicle and paid a little bit better because it's pretty bloody combat there. But then, when they get out of Wagner, they go right back. Some of them go right back to their units. I think there's a regular swapping out that takes place with the, I think it's the 45th Spetsnaz Brigade. I think the Wagner facility near Moscow is co-located. So there's a lot of cross, hatching taking place. And so that's how it started in the Donbass. Then the Russians found that they could use the Wagner concept to do other things abroad. Again, stuff that constitutionally speaking, legally speaking, they couldn't use the regular Russian military for. For instance, in Syria, Wagner has been used for some very specific missions that look as if the Russian elite commando forces were doing it. Well, the Russian elite commando forces are doing it. They've just been sheep dipped, meaning they're no longer Russian elite commando forces. They're out and they've been classified as Wagner private military contractors. So when they go over to Syria, they're Wagner. And they do the same thing in Africa. Wagner provides advisory support to nations like in Mali. They're operating, I think, in the Central African Republic. They're operating. They were operating in Mozambique. They're operating in Libya and elsewhere. So they do jobs that in the United States would be done by CIA paramilitaries from Ground Branch. The Special Activities Division of the CIA as a ground branch where they have paramilitaries that go out there. Special Forces do advisory work. It's the same thing Wagner's doing. So Wagner is just the Russian way of doing what we do. We do the same thing. It's not as though, Wagner's running around and there's this malign influence out there. Wagner is doing in Africa what we do in Africa. We have a significant special forces deployment into Africa that provide advisory capacity and training support and combat support to a number of African nations. Wagner's doing the same thing on behalf of Russia. It's just that the Russian legal system requires an entity like Wagner to exist, because otherwise you would have to get the permission of Parliament to go over. And strangely enough, the Russians actually care about their law and that Parliament needs to be engaged. Unlike the United States, which has this wide open authorization for use of military force that it allowed the military to go wild. Congress just turned a blind eye to the fact that successive presidents have been employing U.S. forces in combat around the world without any legal authority from Congress.
Hey, apropos of nothing, did you happen to see David Letterman's interview with Zelensky?
I did. I even saw Zelensky tell his Jewish joke.
Yeah, that wasn't funny at all. But I thought Letterman's joke was funny when he was in the club there and he said that he went to Ukraine to escape U.S. violence. That was funny. But there's an example of how no government had to spend anything on information warfare. Netflix picked up the tab for that, right?
Yeah. But again, do you think Zelensky would have done the interview with David Letterman and without being propped up by the United States, being pumped up by the United States? Or remember, what made Zelensky big, his viral TV moment wasn't a viral TV moment. He didn't even say it. Is when a CIA officer released a press release that alluded to Zelensky saying, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." Yeah, right. And suddenly it was like, Zelensky's the man. Oh, Zelensky, he's great. He didn't say that. The CIA wrote that and then released it. Much of almost everything Zelensky does, the speech he gave to the British Parliament that was Churchillian in its content was written by MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service. The speech that Zelensky gave to the U.S. Congress that made references to the Founding Fathers. You think Zelensky knows anything about the Founding Fathers? He knows nothing about the Founding Fathers, but it was written by the CIA. And so, David Letterman was he
fell for it, hook, line, and sinker.
Say again?
Letterman fell for it, a hook, line, and sinker, and he just perpetrated the mythology.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He should interview Putin. I mean, love Zelensky or hate him, the fact is he's out there all over the place. What would be useful is to do an interview with Putin. Now, not that, Letterman or Netflix would be seeking that, but if they did request an interview with him, do you think Putin would give it?
I don't know. Putin gave an interview to Oliver Stone. And a very extensive interview. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility. I just think that, I don't think Putin would grant an audience to somebody whose purpose in the interview was to denigrate Putin, to attack Putin.
What about you interviewing Putin? You're already interviewing high-level military officials in Russia on your other podcast. Has that ever come up as a possibility?
So you do want me to be killed? Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Look, I mean, in my wildest dream, that would be a wonderful interview. That would be an amazing interview. But if I'm Putin's presidential advisor, he doesn't need this. I mean, it would be cool for me. I wouldn't turn it down.
I didn't say he needed it. But
he could have. You're trying to tell me that our channel's suffering and we need to get some talent.
Oh yeah, I'd rather you do it here. But I thought it seems like it would fit in with the other podcasts.
All right, I'm gonna write his press secretary and ask if Putin will come on the.
I know you don't like controversy, so maybe that's why.
Okay, thank you.
Perestroika, Watkins. I don't know about that. Please talk about the fractional orbital bombardment system, or as we say on the street, FOBS. A program the Soviets had. Was that part of the INF? Does the U.S. have this program too? How much more powerful is it over ICBMs, hypersonics, etc.?
Fractional orbital bombardment system is basically. It was designed to evade missile defenses. If you have an ICBM and you fire it and it goes into a ballistic trajectory, that's why we call them ballistic missiles. What goes up must come down in a predictable fashion. So it gets fired up, radars pick it up, missile defense cues, intercept, boom, there it goes. Fractional orbital bombardment system takes it up and it goes into a complete orbit. You don't know when it's coming down. There's no predictability of it whatsoever. And the Soviets came up with this in the 1960s, and it just freaked the Americans out. So it was prohibited. It part of that, a thing called arms control. When you have a destabilizing technology, it's prohibited. So it's been banned. There was some belief that during the Cold War, the Soviets retained some FOB's capacity just as sort of a reserve. And today there's some belief that if we don't bring arms control back into the forefront, that the Soviets could, or the Russians could, reincorporate FOB's capacity in some of their systems. But it's also obviated now because the Russians have missiles of greater range. So the Russians have, for instance, their Sarmat missile can be fired, and normally the Russian missiles or Soviet missiles will be fired over the Arctic. So they're going to come in from their missile silos or their missile bases, and they're going to be fired in the north over the Arctic towards the United States, because that's the shortest route there. So all of our systems are designed to detect that. The Sarmat can be fired the other direction, the other way. It can go south over the South Pole and come in behind where we have no radars to pick it up. It can be fired any way once. That's the kind of range it has. Not only that, but with the Avant-Garde hypersonic warhead, the warhead now will maneuver. So when they release the warhead in space, it's not going to come down in a predictable pattern. It's going to come down and it's going to maneuver, and it's going to defeat any missile defense system. So FOBs is an old technology, an old concept. It used to be called a destabilizing technology, but now there's other technologies that are better and more destabilizing. So I think people will be more interested in systems like the hypersonic maneuvering warheads and systems like the Sarmat than FOBs, because FOBs are just basically taking your warhead and putting it in orbit. And
okay,
did that make sense?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
But I also got a suggestion here that if you just simply make Putin aware that you're the Time Person of the Year, then he might be more likely to grant you an interview. So,
information warfare, Jeff. You're a master of it. You're a master of it.
Stephen Harper, London, England. What are your thoughts on an imminent Turkish invasion of northern Syria? If they do invade, how will it impact the relationship between the Turks, the Russians, and the U.S.?
Well, Turkey's been threatening this expansion of its existing invasion of northern Syria. Let's never forget that the Turks are already in northern Syria. They've already invaded northern Syria. They're just threatening to expand the invasion to take over the entire border, to create this, I believe, 30-kilometer deep buffer zone that separates the Turkish border from Syria to prevent Kurdish separatists who are operating out of Syria from crossing over into Turkey and destabilizing Turkey, and prevent the Kurds that are in Turkey from being resupplied from Syria, northern Syria, Kurdistan. How serious is it? Look, the Turks have been doing this for decades. They've been at war with the Kurds for decades. Turks aren't afraid to intervene. And there'll probably be some sort of intervention, just because Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is coming up for re-election, and having put so much political capital behind the concept of the necessity of a military intervention, for him to back down. You don't want to do that. You don't want to create an opportunity for your political opponents to say you're weak on national security. That's one of the things that helps people lose an election, to be weak on national security, weak on the economy. He's doing good on the economy right now because of Russia, because with Russia's help, he's created the promise of a very economically beneficial energy hub that'll operate with, we talked about Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, Turk Stream. There's already one Turk Stream pipeline coming in from Russia. the Russians are talking about building a second one that comes in, and this will be excess capacity that will allow Turkey to re-export this gas into Southern Europe and elsewhere. And Turkey's also talking about bringing in gas from Azerbaijan, from Turkmenistan, and from other areas, so it becomes a genuine energy hub, a supplier of natural gas. And this can't happen without Russia. So the reason why I brought that in is that even though Turkey needs to carry out this operation, they have to do it in a way that doesn't get them involved in direct conflict with the Syrian government. Why? Because the Syrian government is allied with the Russians, who are in Syria to protect the Syrian government from these Islamist groups that the United States and Turkey had actively backed since 2012. So I think there's a lot of phone conversations taking place right now between Putin, Erdogan, and even Assad. There was some rumors that Putin was trying to get Assad and Erdogan back together. They used to be best buddies before 2012. This was one of those weird relationships where Erdogan and his wife would fly into Damascus and be met by Assad, and Assad would fly into Turkey and meet them, and they were always calling each other and coordinating. And then after that, they had a falling out because Erdogan basically backed the Muslim Brotherhood that had been kicked out of Syria back in the 1980s by Assad's father, and had installed itself in Turkey as a force in waiting. Erdogan, of course, is an Islamist of the Muslim Brotherhood school, not pure, but he supports them. And he was working with the Muslim Brotherhood to come back into Syria to overthrow Assad. And so, of course, that sours relationships. But Assad survived. Assad is alive thanks to the Russians who intervened in 2015. And but now you have this weird little triangle between the Russians, the United States, and Turkey. Then you have the Kurds that the Turks want to oppose, but the United States is backing the Kurds. The Kurds want to keep the Turks from invading, so they're talking about dropping relations with the U.S. and linking up with the Syrian government. So there's talks there, and if they do that, then the Russians provide their security umbrella. It's all very complicated. The last thing Turkey wants is to have a direct conflict between Turkish troops and Russian troops, or Turkish troops and Syrian troops. So I think there's going to be a face-saving mechanism where the Turks are going to be able to carry out a limited operation against the Kurds, but that the Russians and the Syrian government then are going to come up with some sort of negotiated compromise that seeks to deconflict the Kurds and the Turks. I think I answered the question.
In Tuesday's podcast, you said you just got Robitussin and you were about to start taking it. Did you, in fact, start taking it?
I chugged the entire bottle.
I'm not sure it's doing any good. Maybe you should try some of these remedies that the audience is suggesting. Perhaps the person whose name we're not allowed to say will go get you a shot. Yeah, we'll get you a shot of cognac or whatever is in the house.
Voldemort will take care of me. She's very good about that. She's going to brew up some tea and force it down my throat. She's using a turkey baster and
put a little cognac in it too.
We don't have any cognac. We don't drink. We're boring.
All right. Thierry Giroud from Nice, France. What kind of army does the Taliban have, and how highly do you rate their fighting capability?
Well, the Taliban military structure has evolved over the years. In 2001, they had some formal forces, a lot of tribal militias, this loose confederation affiliation of militias and standing forces, but that was wiped out by the U.S. That structure was pretty much taken off the board. The Taliban went to ground because they are derived primarily from the Pashtun tribes of eastern and southern Afghanistan. And then they resurrected themselves, operating out of Pakistan with Pakistani government help. and they became a very effective insurgency. They had some very highly trained forces. Remember, they spent 20 years fighting the United States, fighting NATO, fighting an Afghan military that was trained by the United States and NATO. And you learn a lot when you fight a capable opponent. You learn an awful lot about, does she like being called Voldemort? No, I'm in a lot of trouble when I said that. She just said she didn't want her name mentioned on, so I came up with that name, but I think that lost its humor aspect a long time ago. So we need to come up with something else, Jeff.
I only recently found out what it means. Do you think most of the audience understands it?
I think they do now.
Oh, yeah.
So,
all right.
But the mere fact that we're talking about Voldemort, you remember, you're not supposed to say the name. But my point is, the Taliban, even though they were this insurgency, they had the ability to project power into into Pashtun tribal areas very effectively. They were fighting the Americans. They are familiar with our communications, with our fire support. They know how to operate against aircraft. They know how to operate against artillery. They won the conflict. They beat us, not by destroying us on the battlefield, by outlasting us because we couldn't destroy them. So they're very good in that kind of conflict. What they're not good at is stand-up conventional war. So if the Taliban, for instance, I think one of the reasons why this question is coming up is that the Taliban now has had some conflicts with Pakistan. Just yesterday and today, I believe there's been some shooting on the border at some checkpoints, and the Taliban had a recent flare-up with the Iranians on their border as well. And there's question of, the Taliban beat the United States, but can they beat, Pakistan and Iran? And the answer is no. In a stand-up fight, the Taliban will not win. They're not organized to fight as a conventional military force. They have some units that, have some special operations capabilities. They were good at, launching raids or planning IEDs, but they're literally, you can't take a company of Taliban and expect them to fight as the equivalent of an Iranian company or a Pakistani company. The Iranians and the Pakistanis are trained in modern warfare, maneuver warfare, combined arms warfare. The Taliban are not. Now, if the Iranians and the Pakistanis invade Afghanistan, the Taliban go back to ground, then the Taliban are going to beat them because that's what they do. They absorb you and then they chew you up and they spit you out. But to stand up and fight on the border, the Taliban won't win.
John Bateman, Manchester, England. What was the difference between the Taliban insurgency and the ISIS one? The Taliban won theirs after 20 years, whilst ISIS failed and had their territory taken away from them. What did the Taliban do right? I love whilst.
Wow. Oh, he's British. Manchester, England.
Very British, very British.
He's teaching us how to speak properly. The Taliban is operating, again, they're of the Pashtun tribes. They are Pashtun tribes. The Taliban just means students. It's, basically they're religious students. Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban movement, was a mullah, and he was just teaching his students in a religious school when this is the myth. There's a story that a family was stopped at one of the warlords because after the Mujahideen kicked the Soviets out, there was a civil war in Afghanistan, and basically it was taken over by different warlords, very corrupt, drug smuggling, human trafficking, bad guys. And they stopped a family at a checkpoint, and I think they kidnapped the daughters, and they were going to do whatever you do with kidnapped daughters. And so the family came to Mullah Omar's madras, or place of worship, where he was teaching the Taliban, training them, and they said, "We need help." And so Mullah Omar mobilized the students. They went out and they found the guys who had kidnapped the daughter, and they hung them, killed them, executed them on the spot. And as soon as that word came out, other people started coming saying, "Hey, we need help too." And next thing you know, Mullah Omar is leading this movement of the Talib, the students, going out and spreading Islamic law, instilling a system of justice where none existed, and they were widely successful, and so successful that basically all they had to do is move into a direction. When they moved into eastern Afghanistan, up into Khost and other areas, Jalalabad, the militias over there just said, we're going to join you. We're all Talib now too. They became part of the Taliban, this giant movement. And so, but you say they didn't lose they lost all their territory in 2001, 2002, when the United States came in. We sort of crushed them. We wiped the map of them. They were non-existent for a while. They went to ground in Pakistan, and then because they're tribal, they were able to come back to the tribe and rebuild, because we don't know how to occupy, right? We didn't have a plan for success, whatever you want to say. But the notion that the Taliban were always in control of the territory is absolutely false notion. The Taliban were defeated by the United States in 2001, 2002. Now we come to ISIS. ISIS is a byproduct of what we call the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI. AQI, the precise roots of it are uncertain. When Saddam Hussein was preparing for the American invasion, we know that he issued orders out to his intelligence service. The Iraqi intelligence service had successfully infiltrated a number of opposition groups, including Wahhabist, Sunni Islamic groups, including the Shia. They were all throughout there. And what he said is, I need you to stay in place, stay under cover. And the time will come when the Ba'ath Party will ask you to rise up and take action. And so Saddam, of course, was captured, tried, executed, but the Ba'ath Party remained, especially up into the Tikrit region. The resistance, the Marines in Ramadi were fighting Special Republican Guard units. They just weren't called Special Republican Guard units anymore. But you ask the Marines in Ramadi, hey, what do you think about the guys you're fighting? They say, these are good soldiers. These guys know tactics. They're using fire and maneuver. They're coordinated, because they were Saddam's boys, who were fighting. They're also tribal. The Special Republican Guard and Saddam's inner circle were all tribal based upon loyalty. So a very similar thing happening in Iraq that had happened in Afghanistan. Remember the Pashtun tribal nature. It exists in Iraq. This is all tribal based, tribal alliances, tribal allegiances. And the United States came in. And what we did, especially in Western Iraq and in the Sunni areas north of Baghdad, we'd come in and we'd seek to impose our will on the area. So we would arrest the local clerics. We would arrest the sheiks, the heads of these tribal clans, and then we would try to impose on them Shia overlords or Kurdish overlords, which didn't work. You don't bring Kurds and Shia in to run Sunnis. But in doing that, we stripped away the fabric of society, the framework that held Sunni society together. And by doing that, you created the opportunity for other voices to rise up and be taken seriously. And this is where these Islamic movements, especially the Wahhabist movements, they started to stand up. This is where you saw there was a Jordanian terrorist, Al-Zawahiri, I believe his name. No, that was the Egyptian that just got killed. I don't know. There's a famous video of him shooting a gun. He's a goofball, but he basically was running AQI, and they stood up. But when he stood up, yes, he was a Muslim radical thing, but the people that followed him up were Saddam's boys. The guys who were under deep cover provided the military expertise for AQI. And long story short, after the AQI was fighting out in Baghdad, an element was sent to Syria to try and set up something in Syria that could effectively bring reinforcements into Baghdad. So AQI went into Syria, and started what's called ISIS, the Islamic State. And it took on a life of its own. It again, tribal based. They went into the tribes of Syria. They went into Western Iraq, had tribal loyalties, and you had this vacuum of authority where there's a lot of resentment towards Baghdad, towards the Iraqi leadership, towards the United States, and ISIS was able to explode. And we saw that in 2014, where ISIS exploded across Syria and Iraq. Now, people say they've been defeated. Well, they were defeated like the Taliban was defeated, physically removed from terrain, but they exist. It's an ideology. To say that ISIS doesn't go to Iraq today, go to Anbar, Western Iraq, stand up and say, there's no ISIS here. They'll kill you right there. Who's going to kill you? ISIS. Go to Syria, ask the Syrian army what happens in the vicinity of Palmyra, in other areas where ISIS ambushes occur on a daily basis. ISIS has not been defeated. ISIS is real. ISIS exists. It's ideologically motivated, and it's linked to the tribes. And as long as there's this vacuum of authority, these tribes will continue to be, very fertile recruiting grounds for the Islamic State. But and we see it's not just Syria. Islamic State now has migrated into Africa. A huge Islamic State presence. They're in Afghanistan because the Taliban was considered to be thank you, al-Zarqawi. Thank you very much. V for Vendetta. I knew somebody was going to help me out with that name. It began with a Z. But they're in Afghanistan, where the Taliban are deemed to be too soft, not Islamic enough. And so, again, when you have a vacuum that's filled by fanatic people, that's where ISIS comes in. ISIS exists in the former Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union. Tajikistan has ISIS. Uzbekistan has ISIS. ISIS is everywhere because it's ideologically based, and it'll find roots in clan or tribal type. So there's a lot of parallels between the two, but it's not an exact parallel.
All right, we're still getting flooded with remedies for your condition. It's like religions. Everybody's pushing something different. So who's to know?
They don't like my Diet Coke remedy?
I guess not. Somebody asked if my microphone is new. The answer is relatively new, but we've already done a few episodes with it, so not brand new. De Gulden Middenweg, what is your opinion on the military buildup in Poland? There are more than 500 tanks unloaded.
It's a lot of tanks. What was my opinion of the military buildup in Poland? We know that the United States has deployed a core headquarters there, advanced headquarters. I think it's 5th Corps. It might be 7th Corps, but I think it's 5th Corps. A corps is an organization of 2 or more divisions. A division is an organization of 3 or more brigades. The United States has a permanent rotational system where we deploy a heavy armored brigade into Europe, and we rotate it. And so that brigade is always coming in. So some of these tanks, I believe, are related to this brigade rotating in. The next thing is that we are also building this facility in Poland that's going to house at least 1, maybe 2 brigade complements of equipment, similar to what we used to do in Germany during the Cold War, where during the Reforger exercises, the return of forces to Germany, we'd fly troops in who would marry up with the equipment on the ground and go to war. That way we can mobilize quickly. So the idea is that there will be these brigade-sized packages in Poland that will be prepared for American troops to fly in and mobilize. I think some of these tanks might be part of that. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, that's a lot of tanks. 500 tanks is a lot of tanks. A half can opium. There we go.
There's no shortage of suggestions.
Yeah.
Wide
but I'll have to dig into that. I do believe that some of these tanks are related to the rotation of the brigade, And then the other tanks, I think, would be part of this this prepositioned equipment that they're putting into Poland. But maybe we could put another word that I fumble all the time, an asterisk.
What, on this question?
Yeah, and so I can come back to it.
Okay.
I just want to find out what these 500 tanks are. I mean,
all right,
that's a big number. That's a really big number.
All right, I will follow up on that. I'm going to have to. I'm going to be kind of busy fending off Tori, though. You should have seen before you came on. Before, she was swooning over me, positively swooning because of the leather jacket. Yeah, because of the leather jacket. She likes dangerous men, so suddenly she saw me in a whole new light.
Well, okay, right. You've got the corner on the dangerous man market.
So I don't know if I'll have time to deal with things like following up, but I'll try to squeeze it in.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Henry 999, the Frozen North. As a former jarhead myself, is that a pejorative? I guess it's not a pejorative.
No, that's
okay.
A compliment. It's good to be a former jarhead.
Doesn't sound like it though, but okay.
That's former. You don't eat crayons for a living. If you ate crayons and you learned to love crayons, you'd say former jarhead was a compliment.
All right, I'm just a civilian.
A civilian, that's right.
Yeah. As a former jarhead myself, active duty 70 to 72, I'm curious. When you were performing the Iraq inspections, were you still on active duty, seconded to the UN? Did you reach 20 years and a retirement pension?
Well, the easy part of that question is the last part. I did not reach 20 years, and I do not have a retirement pension. When I was performing the Iraq inspections, when I first went into Iraq as an inspector in September, when I first started with the United Nations, September 1991, I had left active duty just in June of 91, but I was still a reservist and drilling as a reservist. But my reserve status had nothing to do with my UN assignment. I was brought into the United Nations initially on a short-term contract, and then after several months, I was actually hired on as a full-time UN staff member, which, again, Voldemort is furious at me for ever leaving that job because it's wonderful. I mean, to get your foot into the door of the United Nations like that.
Who was furious?
My wife is furious at me for leaving that job.
It was
a wonderful opportunity. And she's right. I mean, I was in the UN system. They have great salary, great benefits, great pension, great everything, great opportunity. And I was in it. But I left that job in Maverick is also furious that I left the UN. Okay. I left that job in 1994, primarily because of complications between me and the United States government. You see, I'm a very patriotic individual, and I am not. I don't like being called, somebody who's not serving the interests of the United States. And because I was being such a good UN employee, I wasn't doing what the U.S. government wanted me to do. I wrote about this in a book called Iraq Confidential, so I don't want to get into too much of it. But so I left and I returned to the Marine Corps on active duty. Why? Why would you do that, Scott? Well, because a guy from the CIA came up and said, "We know you're a patriot, and we'd like you to come work for us, but you have to clean off a little bit. You've been in the UN system." You've had too much contact with foreign intelligence officers, so we need you to become clean. So why don't you go to the Marine Corps, and you'll be cleansed of your contacts, and then we'll bring you on board. So I said, okay, I'll do that. I went back to the Marine Corps. As soon as I got back in the Marine Corps, the United Nations is calling up saying the whole system's gone to hell in a handbasket. We need Ritter back because he knew what he was doing, and so. The Marine Corps agreed to release me to the United Nations as an active duty intelligence officer. And so I spent a period of time from September of 94 to December 94 with the United Nations as an active duty Marine Corps officer. But then the United Nations said, we need him to come back full time. The Marine Corps said, we can't do that. So now they had to release me. And so the Marine Corps released me from active duty, and I was picked up on a contract with the on-site inspection agency that was managed by the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's how I spent my final time in Iraq.
All righty then. So how close did you get to the pension?
12 years. I was 8 years away from a pension.
All right. Well, maybe our audience will kick in with some donations to compensate for the lack of pension.
Help me retire. It's a serious problem, Jeff. I'm going to be working until I'm like 85.
That's not such a bad thing. Same here. I'm a late bloomer too, and I think there's a silver lining to that, because if you stop working, and I don't know, what do? You just kind of waste away. Look at all kinds of people who just keep going. Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones. Larry King. What are you pointing at? Yeah, the Bob Dylan poster, right? I don't know. You'd be bored if you were just sitting home. You're too patriotic, anyway. Did they name those missiles after you? The Patriot missiles?
They did. They did. Yes. They said
John on Kauai. Is that how to pronounce it? Kauai. Yeah. The Pacific Ocean. Is that just a cute way of saying Hawaii, or does John live on a boat? I'm not sure which. But in any case, John's question is as follows. Victoria Nuland's father was the son of Jewish Ukrainian immigrants to the USA. Is she a Banderite? What about the other members of the Kagan cabal? They certainly are evil enough, so says John.
I believe that Victoria Nuland, this is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to delve into speculation. Before I say something about Victoria, I need to nail down the facts. I remember reading something, but I want to make sure I'm 100% right. So again, that's another question. We need to put the asterisk.
There is an S before the K, which is the whole reason. Just remember, the next time you're not sure, the whole reason you're even wondering is because there is an S before the K.
Well, I say asterisks, and that's wrong.
All right.
Yeah, that's absolutely incorrect. So it has to be asterisk.
Yes.
But again, I'm not a fan of Victoria Nuland.
Hang on a second. Tori, if you promise to stop harassing me and try to get me to, do what guys do, I'll work on this. Do you promise, Tori?
Work on what exactly?
Do you promise to just lay off? Because stop pursuing me romantically, so I have time. Is that all right?
All right.
You do that for me, just for a couple of days. Thank you. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
Do that.
Thank you, darling.
There must be some heated chat going on in the background that I'm not aware of.
Oh, it's really hot.
Producer Jeff chat. Why am I not plugged in? This is the Scott Ritter Extra Show. I'm the talent. I need to be part of this.
You got to log in early if you want to be part of the sparks that we're flying.
Thank you, Pamela, for contributing to my early retirement.
Oh, thank you, Pamela.
The president has a big stick. I promise you.
Okay, go ahead. That was sort of a non sequitur.
I don't know what was going on there, but that's okay.
That's a non sequitur. Go ahead. Where were we? Oh, next question. Are you waiting for me? Sorry. Mikhail from St. Petersburg, Russia. In the Russian blogosphere, you are often considered excessively optimistic and, reckless with your predictions, while many famous commentators like Strelkov, etc., consider the special military operation a failure, a quagmire, or an endless war. How would you respond to them? And if I may add another question to this before you respond, are you even aware of what they say about you in the Russian blogosphere?
Well, I'm aware of this mindset. I understand. I know who Strelkov is. He's that's I guess pseudonym. Is that the word, or a nom de guerre? of an individual who has been involved in the Donbass fighting since 2014. He is very vocal. He has tried to volunteer to go back and fight. I think he sort of made it to the front lines, and then they found out who he was and they pulled him out. There's some controversy going on about that, but he's extraordinarily pessimistic about this. He's very anti-Russian high command, anti-Putin. And so, yeah, he has a very negative take on this. I don't share his opinion. If you want to say I'm optimistic, look, Russia's going to win. All I have to say is to anybody watching this, what the hell do you think's happening right now? Is this a Russian defeat? Go to Bakhmut. Tell me who's winning right now. Go fight for the Ukrainians. You'll die in a day. That's okay. If that's what you want to do. Go. Or go fight with the Russians. You may get wounded, but you're going to win. And then why don't you go and mobilize with the Ukrainian reserves? Oh, they don't have any more. They're all dead. Or you could mobilize with the 300,000 Russians, around 200,000, which still have to arrive on the battlefield. Why don't you ride on one of those great Ukrainian tanks? They don't have them anymore. They're all blown up. Or you could ride with one of the modern Russian tanks, the T-90 M3, M4, whatever. The Terminator, you want to ride with that? The Ukrainians don't have any equivalent to that. You could fly into Russian aircraft. What about the Ukrainian Air Force? You want to fly with them? So all the people that say that I'm optimistic, I'm just realistic. I'm a military analyst. I'm a professional. I've been getting it right before many of you guys were even born. So, I think I'm getting it right now. We'll find out. History's the final judge. That we could have a conversation this time next year. And, if I'm wrong, I'll say, gosh, I was wrong. I don't think I am, though. I think I'm very realistic. And notice that they will say, they use terms like, optimistic. Who's saying that? The pessimists. I will say this, I didn't ask to be popular on the Russian blogosphere. I didn't go out of my way to become somebody that resonates in Russia's social media. It happened, but I'm not competing with anybody. I think there's a lot of people out there that are somewhat upset that I have this profile in Russia, and they view this as,
which wasn't actually acknowledged in the question. I mean, that's the other part of it. The question doesn't acknowledge that Scott is actually huge in Russia. Some of our podcasts, among others, are stolen and they put translations in Russian. Some of them get close to 1 million views per episode. You think I'm exaggerating? You can look at it. It says it right there on YouTube.
It's an amazing phenomenon. I think I said that right.
Phenomenon.
Phenomenon one.
Yeah,
it's an
right.
amazing phenomenon. I'm not going to pretend that I'm upset with it. I'm not. I'm tickled pink. I think this is awesome. This is great. But I am not competing with Strelkov. I am not competing with these other Telegram channels out there that take umbrage at what I'm saying. I'm not your competition, guys. I'm simply saying what I believe to be the case. I put the case out there, and if it resonates, great. But I think a lot of people think that I'm attacking them, or I'm not. I'm not trying to beat anybody in the Russian blogosphere. I'm not trying to drown any voices out. It's simply my take. I would be more than happy to have a civil debate with Strelkov or anybody else out there who disagrees with me. I'd love to hear their point of view. I am the man of the year. You don't want to have a debate with me because I am the Time Magazine man of the year, according to Jeff. But again, people take this personally, and I understand it. But some people make a living off of their Telegram pages. That's how they earn an income, and they see the competition that they view me as competition for potential viewing audiences, but that's not the case. Jeff, I just answer questions. It's called Ask the Inspector. I answer a question, and I try to answer it factually. I try to answer it logically, with reason. And I'm happy with my answers. I've always said this about my Iraq experience. I love my transcripts, not because I'm articulate, but because I was right. And you know what? I love my transcripts to date. You can call me optimistic. Pull up my transcript and let's have at it, guy. You take my words apart. You say, you said this. And I'll say, yep, I said that. And look what's happening. You said this. Yep, I said that. And look what's happening. I'm happy with where I'm at analytically.
All right. But seriously, some brilliant minds would beg to differ.
The idea that Putin is ever going to defeat Ukraine is beyond comprehension.
See what I mean?
Jeff, I have PTSD because of Joe. I mean, he called me Spotty Boy. He said I didn't need to ride in. I'm going to start to tear up because this is about limousines and paychecks and Joe.
All right. We have now reached the point of the podcast where we have our final pre-planned question. Then we'll take some live questions. I see. And don't think I didn't notice that you were flashing that mug. Scott's book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika.
That's
Go
a great
to scottextra.com and you can buy it from there, and we'll get a little commission if you.
That'll help our retirement fund.
That's right. That's right. And then maybe I'll drink some better wine. Now, Richie was saying that there's something wrong with the California blend. Is that considered inferior? I don't know. I thought it was perfectly fine, at least potentially. Robert from Edmonton, Alberta, which is in Canada, as you might know, Scott. Larry Johnson, who joined us on a previous episode, and we had kind of a civil debate with him, said Russia's air defense system could survive a nuclear first strike. If so, would human beings survive if Russia only destroyed, say, Washington, D.C., London, and maybe Paris with nuclear conventional weapons?
I'm just going to
say that.
I don't know. I'll answer it this way. If we're in a nuclear conflict where Washington, London, Paris have been struck, that's not going to be the limit of the nuclear conflict. It means that there's going to be there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war, especially when capital cities of major powers have been struck. So the bottom line is all the weapons will fly, everybody will die, nobody will survive.
All right. Should we get Larry back on again? That was a good broadcast. I thought you had a good chat with Larry. What do you think about that?
Well, we need more controversy. We got to come up with some controversy. Remember last time we had the what was it?
Oh, it was about the game changer.
Game changing, yes.
Yeah,
we need another theme. I'll come up with something that'll make Larry angry, and then we can have one of these artificial. It'll be like Harry and William. We can create this tension between them.
Great analogy. I was thinking of professional wrestlers, when they scream at each other in the interview.
Oh, by the way, Jeff, did you want to bring up this book too?
Well, I'll bring it up with great enthusiasm if you took the step that you have been threatening to take. Did you finally take that step?
I'm waiting for a response, but I can pretty much guarantee you the response will be positive in our favor. So soon we will have the publishing rights to this book, and then we can do with it as we see fit.
Great. And what we're talking about is presenting workshops with serious activists who want to actually be, if I may use that term again, game changers. And it'll be sort of a handbook that we use in connection.
And we have allies in Ann Arbor.
Yes.
Who, when they're not trying to set me up with Bandera assassins, are actually working overtime to do exactly what we're talking about. We have another ally in Japan, the gentleman who runs the peace dividend concept. I think we can create an alliance where we can beta test.
Also Oakland and in Austin and in Dallas. All these things are percolating. So could be a very interesting year next year.
The movement?
It could be a new movement. I think we need a new name for it, though. We have time to to sort that out. Speaking of which, it is the end of the year, so you start thinking about what happened this year and looking ahead to the next year. We're going to take the whole last week of December off, but we will be on next week, including Tuesday and Friday, which is the 23rd, very close to Christmas, but we will be doing a podcast.
Holiday special.
That is right, the holiday special, but we'll take the following week off. All right, Tori, my beautiful princess, who won't leave me alone now that she's seen me as a dangerous man in a leather jacket. Let's see what we have for our coughing weapons inspector, Terrace.
Oh, I'm sorry, that cough was just more about
laughing at my bullshit.
Yeah. the dangerous man.
I am dangerous. Don't get me started.
I won't, Jeff. You scare me, man. You scare me.
All
You're
right.
wearing a leather jacket. That scares me.
That is all it takes. I am so very dangerous. Years ago, I heard Russia developed a vacuum bomb equivalent to a nuclear weapon. I've heard nothing of it during the whole conflict. Is it real?
Well, first of all, a vacuum bomb will never be the equivalent to a nuclear weapon. It's two totally different concepts. I guess maybe they're talking about explosive force, explosive potential, etc. But they developed a vacuum bomb. Sure, we also can call it a fuel air explosive. The United States has been using them for some time. We used them. I think we called them Blue 82s, BLU 82. We used them during Vietnam to clear out landing zones, helicopter landing zones in the jungle. So the C-130 would come over, a pallet would come out, parachute come down, and it has a little probe. And when the probe comes down and hits the ground, it spews out vapor, fuel vapor, and then an explosion will come out, and it simultaneously blows it out, and it creates a giant vacuum, sucks everything out, blows the trees down, helicopters can land. We used it on Koh Tang Island against the Khmer Rouge when the Marines were called in to rescue the Mayaguez in 1975. During the Gulf War, we dropped a couple of them on Iraqi defenses, or at least near the Iraqi defense lines. One went off, and there was an SAS patrol, British Special Air Service patrol, operating in Western Iraq, looking for Scuds, by the way. And they saw it go off, and this giant mushroom cloud came out. I said, "Oh my God, the Americans dropped a nuke," and they're radioing back. Did we go to nuclear? But that was just a visual. There was no nuke. The Russians have developed similar weapons. They have a 500 kilogram version. That's a 1,000 pound bomb, and I think they might even have a 1,000 kilogram version. That's a 2,000 pound bomb. But the bomb can either use sort of metallic dust. So you spread that out as a cloud of dust, sort of like a grain silo. There's these grain silo explosions that occur every now and then when you don't properly maintain a grain silo, and you have the dust in there, and if static electricity comes off or a lightning strike, you get this massive explosion. That's the idea. Or you can use fuel. But the Russians have these bombs. They've used them. They've used them in conflict here. They've dropped them a couple times on Ukrainians, but it is a devastating weapon, and they use smaller variants of this. I think that it's called the TOS, TOS, TOS 1 and TOS 2 are multiple rocket launcher type systems. They call them flamethrower weapons, but they'll fire these off, and it's the same. It's a thermobaric weapon. A big blast, it'll suck the air out of your lungs, it'll kill you, crush buildings. If you're in a trench, it'll kill you. So the Russians have been using thermobaric weapons for some time now. Whether or not I think they call it the father of all bombs, whether or not that's actually been that the biggest fuel air explosive has been employed in Ukraine yet, I don't know. But I do know that they have them. They have been using them. There's some hesitancy in using them because remember, the Russians really don't want to kill Ukrainian soldiers. They prefer the Ukrainian soldiers surrendered. And when you use a weapon of this magnitude, you're killing a lot of people who otherwise might have had an opportunity to surrender. The Russians would prefer to process a prisoner of war than bury a dead Ukrainian.
You know how we know for sure that Scott is under the weather? He hasn't used his favorite word even once.
Odious.
Odious. Odious.
Melina, thank you for the tip, the gratuity, the contribution, the support. Bulgaria and Albania open clubs and statues to celebrate Nazi collaborators in Macedonia. EU and USA are silent even to rewriting the history of occupation, calling in administration. Comments?
What's that word that begins with an A? Ends with a sk.
Asterisk.
Yeah. Put another one on that. Again, I'm familiar with it. I'm not gonna say that. I mean, I've read something about that, but this requires me to be 100% accurate in my facts. So I got to go in and dig deeper into that one before I'm going to commit to it on the show. See the high level of quality that I bring, Jeff?
Absolutely. But you know what? When in doubt, just say it's
Odious. Odious.
Ricardo, the Quebec Angel. Thanks for your work, USTOD team. You're very welcome. Thank you for your support, Richie, and for being a cool dude in a loose mood. U.S. talking about sending troops to audit weapons deliveries. Sounds like a red Christmas is brewing. What will it take for Russia to go no holds barred? Shortened for brevity. Don't judge me, Jeff. Okay, Richie. You can do no wrong in my eyes, Richie. No wrong.
Well, the U.S. already has teams operating out of Kiev who are conducting an audit of the Ukrainian the considerable tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment that we've sent over to Ukraine, to include manned portable weapon systems like the Javelin missile, the Stinger missile, machine guns, mines, etc. There's concern that many of these weapons have made their way out of Ukraine into the black market. Indeed, some of these weapons have shown up in Europe. Some have shown up in Africa, by the way, in the Lake Chad area, where Boko Haram, one of these African militant groups that is linked to ISIS. And this is politically devastating for the Biden administration because they have pointedly refused to allow the creation of an inspector general type organization who would have, been able to track this kind of stuff. If you recall, Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, stood up in the Senate in May and demanded that there be an inspector general, and he was shot down not only by the Democrats. I have an odious complex.
That's a great line.
Wow. See, you're going to ruin my voice. The Rand Paul was seeking this, but he was shot down by both Democrats and Republicans alike. Mitch McConnell worked with Chuck Schumer, one of the few times they actually worked together, to shoot down this concept. So knowing that the Republicans are going to be in a position to demand, for instance, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are saying she wants to account for these. She wants to hold hearings and find out what happened to these weapons. The Pentagon is trying to get a grip on what happened. So they sent over these on-site inspectors. According to the media that I've been following, that there's dozens of these guys, not hundreds, not thousands, dozens. And the new inspectors they're sending in, I think, are of a specific skill set to manage certain data sets, or to manage, as these initial inspectors were doing their on-site inspections, obviously some problems came up in tracking and accounting for the weapons. And so they're bringing in additional personnel. But according to the media, these are single digits. So we're talking less than 10. Look at that Marine. See, if it was 10, it would be, you'd be at double digits, but single digits. So less than 10 are going in there. So I don't call that a red Christmas. I don't call that anything. It's not. Some people have called it. This is mission creep. This is the incremental, enlargement of the American military footprint on the ground in Ukraine. No, it's basically enhancing the on-site inspection capacity of the U.S. troops who are trying to audit what happened to tens of billions of dollars of U.S. equipment. that's that.
All right. Well, hold on. If it's a Cabernet, then it's not a blend, right? That's the meaning of a blend is it's different. It's not just a Cabernet, right? Do we have wine experts in the audience who can back me up on that?
I back you up, Jeff. I'm an
Okay.
expert on everything.
Joanne Nayeri. Thank you, Joanne. As the conflict escalates in Ukraine, is there a danger of friendly fire?
Well, the answer is yes. In fact, there's a number of anecdotal accounts where the Russian troops are, watching the Ukrainians engage in a firefight amongst themselves because of poor command and control. So a Ukrainian unit will be maneuvering to attack the Russians, passing by another Ukrainian unit that mistakes who they are, and they start firing, and they get a little intramural firefight. That's friendly fire. There's other reports of the mercenaries that are fighting as they seek to withdraw. Ukrainian nationalist units are firing on them to keep them in battle, etc. I think anytime you have this kind of expansion of violence, there's friendly fire, potential. You bring in weapon systems, poorly trained troops, etc. I think we're going to see more and more of this as the command and control of Ukrainian forces degenerates further. So yeah, there's not only a danger of friendly fire, it's occurring, and it's probably going to occur in a greater capacity.
All right, there's a word here that I'm not familiar with, so I'm going to ask you to pronounce it for me, Scott. Do you believe Russians are responsible for
Katyn?
Katyn. I'm from Poland, and I don't buy it.
Katyn Forest is the scene of a massacre. Tens of thousands of Polish officers, their bodies were found there during the Second World War, uncovered by the Germans, who made a big propaganda thing out of it. The Russians, of course, when it occurred, said, no, the Germans killed these guys, and they're just trying to blame it on the Russians. The thing is, there's not a dispute here. We know what happened. We know that in 1939, as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, Germany invaded Poland, and then maybe a week or so later, the Russians came in, and they divided Poland in half based upon a predetermined agreement. Polish soldiers who were in the zone taken by the Russians surrendered, and they were taken to Russia, where they were held in camps. The decision was made to liquidate them because they were deemed to be a political liability for Russia's post-war vision of Poland. They didn't want these officers who were the Russians believed would be aligned with the West and trying to promote a pro-Western government in Poland. They didn't want them around, so they killed them. They took them out in the field and they slaughtered them. They buried them, and there the bodies were remained, except that Germany invaded and pushed the Soviets out. The Germans uncovered the graves, tried to, said this was the Russians that did it, but the Russians created a counter narrative that said it was the Germans that did it. So for a while there was a debate on who actually did it. But I think it's acknowledged now. The Russians have even said, yes, Soviets did Katyn. The archives have been opened up. People have, the documents are there. The orders are there. It's one of these tragedies that took place. I mean, it was murder of tens of thousands of Polish officers.
Sure, Eva Bartlett. We'd be happy to have her back if she wants to come back. So this is the wine, by the way, Coastal Estates. Come on, what do I have?
Why am I moving my head as if I could influence your camera?
I got to figure out how to do this. There we go.
You're showing off your leather jacket now, Jeff.
Coastal Estates Red Blend, California 2020. And it doesn't say what's in it exactly. I noticed that's a weird thing about it. It seems weird to me that sometimes they tell you which types are in it. And other times they don't even tell you. It's just a red
Jeff,
line.
I'm just a simple Marine, but it says wine. I'm pretty sure
Right.
there's wine in
Right.
that bottle.
I know, but it doesn't say what type. It's a blend of something or other. But that just goes to show this is why Tori has started to look at me with the look of love. It's because even though I don't know what the blend is, I'm just going for it anyway, because Danger is my middle name. Or
Danger's
maybe
your
it's
middle
my confirmation name. I'm not sure.
So this is a dating website now.
All right. Ace Brito. Scott, could you talk about covert brainwashing that was being funded in Russia by the USA to destabilize the country from within? Could you? Would you? Will you? Won't you?
I don't know about it, so I'd have to do research on that one. I mean,
Is this
it's
another
cool.
asterisk?
This one's an asterisk. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm never going to remember all this. Optimus Prime. Why are gas prices so low in the U.S. now? Yeah, I've noticed that. Good question.
Dumping on the market of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Joe Biden is basically, in an effort to, have good political outcome at the midterms, was dumping our Strategic Petroleum Reserve on the market to offset.
But we're past the midterms and prices are still going down.
Yeah, but it's still, well, I mean, it's still being absorbed. Just wait. In a moment, by the way, we're being visited by the lunatic, which is one of my cats. She decided she wanted to say hi. Maverick is jealous now. But this is market manipulation. When OPEC starts cutting their prices, when Russia stops delivering oil to any of these nations that have put on this price cap, the prices are going to go through the roof. So get ready, America.
I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
Unseen runner. Is there a scenario where the U.S. and NATO can keep their face, save face, I think is what they mean, if and or when, or maybe keep it, I don't know, or when Ukraine is defeated and the war ends?
Yeah, I mean, there is a scenario. I mean, the bottom line is going to be embarrassing no matter what. But if the U.S. and NATO choose not to make Ukraine an existential issue, unfortunately, they have a Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, who is basically saying that if Russia wins, NATO loses. If you're going to define it that way, then no, NATO is going to not save face is going to be a very bad thing. But if NATO and the United States begin to distance themselves from an outcome, and we're seeing this happening, right? There's a lot of pressure being placed on the Ukrainian government for a negotiated settlement, because I think everybody's knows what's just about to happen. It's over. It's all over. You just had the commanding general of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Zaluzhny, give an interview. I mean, it's one of the funniest interviews. The guy's a comedian. I know I can beat these guys, he said about the Russians. I know I can beat them, but I'm going to need 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, a whole bunch of artillery, a lot of ammunition. I mean, gosh, you know what that reminded me of? The movie Downfall, where Adolf Hitler's around the table, moving armies around on the map that didn't exist. Where is Steiner? Where is Steiner? Well, here's Zaluzhny. I can win. Just give me an army. Give me an army. Hey, Zaluzhny, they gave you an army. You wasted it. They're all dead. They're all dying. NATO already gave you all these tanks, all these armored fighting vehicles, and you blew it, dude. You listened to your president and you launched these attacks that got all your guys killed. You had that army. You're not going to get it again. There's not 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles out there for you to receive. So, and he's setting up, he's saying, now, if we don't receive these, then the outcome is very predictable. Yeah, it's very predictable. You're going to lose. You're going to lose big. And NATO recognizes this. There's nothing left to give them. I mean, yes, we have German defense ministers and defense officials saying things like, wouldn't it be nice to put the Leopard tank in Ukraine to give it a chance to get some operational combat experience against the Russians? Yeah, try it. What'll happen to the Leopards? What happens to every other tank that you put in the field against the Russians? It will be blown up and the crews will die. That's the reality. So NATO needs to stop doubling down on stupid and start distancing themselves from the fiasco that's about to occur in Ukraine. If they do that, they might be able to retain the pretense of a capable defensive alliance. But as we're speaking right now, NATO is literally emptying its arsenal, having it ground up in Ukraine, and is left with nothing. And this will be very problematic for NATO when the Ukrainian army is defeated decisively in the next few months.
Or just get the army they need. It's like, ever hear Steve Martin's advice on how to become a millionaire? First, get $1 million.
I was going to say, first get $1 million. I mean, that's
Yeah. Just get the army you need, no problem. All right, let's do 2 more questions and call it a night. Contra Corriente. How many seconds to midnight do you think we have looking at the recent escalation? An alarmist here, Scott.
Well, I mean, they have every right to be alarmed. Putin just gave a speech that should have everybody, or he answered a question that should have everybody concerned. The question dealt with Russia's nuclear posture, and he was comparing. He said, "Look, it's clear what we have. We will not use nuclear weapons first. Russia will never use nuclear weapons first." But he said, "But we're not going to use them second either." And what he meant by that is the moment Russia detects that missiles are on their way to Russia, Russia's going to fire its own missiles. So Russian missiles will be launched before a nuclear weapon lands on Russian soil. And he said, yes, we'll be dead, but so will you. Launch on detection. But he said what's happening here is that the U.S. has this. I don't know that wasn't U.S. supposed to run out of diesel. That's a great question. I've been waiting for the U.S. to run out of diesel for some time. That's a big fear that people put out there, and yet we seem to have diesel. So we have to be careful about wild conspiracies or wild theories about how everything's going to crash because obviously there's a diesel supply out there. We've got diesel. People are able to power their diesel trucks. So I'll have to dig into that one too. Why do we have diesel? Anyways, back to the nuclear thing. Putin said, the U.S. just promulgated a nuclear posture review that the U.S. has retained its posture from the Bush administration that the U.S. can use nuclear weapons preemptively. That means we are going to strike you first in a non-nuclear scenario. And the Russians said, well, that's sort of problematic. We have a way to respond to that. You fire a nuclear weapon at us, we'll fire at you before yours lands. But he said, here's the thing. The U.S. has come up with this notion of, preemptive strike and decapitation, where the U.S. thinks they can actually eliminate Russian command and control and Russian nuclear weapons before Russia has a chance to fire them. And Putin said this is problematic because there's people in the U.S. that actually believe that this could work. And he said, therefore, we Russia might have to re-examine our own nuclear doctrine and come up with maybe a modification of preemption so that if we think you're getting ready to preempt us, we preempt you. Guys, this is about as dangerous as it gets because this is bringing nuclear launch down to hair trigger status, no room for error. No, hey, we think we saw a launch. We're not, let's call up on the phone. We got 30 minutes to determine whether this is real or not. This is, we think we saw a launch, fire. That's 1 second from midnight, guys. 1 second from midnight. That's where we're at right now. And it's going to get even more dangerous because the New START treaty, which is the last remaining arms control vehicle in effect between the United States and Russia, is going to expire in 2026. there's no effort ongoing right now to renegotiate a follow-on treaty. And when that happens, both the U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals are going to be untethered from the restrictions of New START, and they're going to gravitate into a new arms race where we're going to be employing newer technologies, more dangerous technologies, which when combined with these respective preemptive nuclear doctrines means we're a half a second away from midnight. I'm not optimistic right now. I don't have confidence in the United States. Back when I was doing INF, we had a cadre, a deep bench, so to speak, of arms control experts, people who had cut their teeth on arms control since the 1960s, people who knew their Soviet counterparts, their Russian counterparts. They, so you were able to negotiate treaties like this. Today, we don't have that. They've all retired. We've got no old heads left. We've got no original gangsters. We got nobody who's a genuine arms control expert. We got Jake Sullivan. We got Anthony Blinken. We got a bunch of lawyers from Stanford who are serving as assistant secretary of this, assistant secretary of that. But they don't know anything about arms control, and they're not curious about arms control. We used to have something called the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, ACTA. It was an agency who was the single point of focal point for arms control, coordinating arms control. ACTA got disbanded a long time ago, and as a result, arms control has been taken over by the Department of Defense. You don't want the Department of Defense determining arms control policy. The Department of Defense job is not to reduce weapons. The Department of Defense job is to build more weapons, better weapons. This is insane. We've literally, turned the protection of the chicken coop over to the fox. The United States is broken. And the sad thing is, nothing exists in a vacuum. The Russians used to have this fantastic arms control community as well. But if you're not exercising it, it tends to get dissipated. So the Russian Ministry of Defense is taking over the Russian arms control thing. So we have the two worst entities possible determining arms control, which means they're not about reduction, but about increase at a time when they're going to change their doctrines so they can launch preemptive attacks. Very dangerous situation.
Well, it does sound dangerous, but on the sunny side, gas in Texas is only $2.38 a gallon, according to one of our viewers.
Let's move to Texas.
Let's at least visit. All right, the final question of the night. Joe H., could you comment on the explosion at the Polish police station from a Ukrainian gift today, or the mail bombs in Spain from a week or so ago?
I mean, the point is we have incidents, but we don't have enough information. There's a lot of spin going on in the media, a lot of conjecture. Understand this, that these could be deliberate acts of provocation designed to generate a political response from the Poles or from others. So we don't know. It's too early to say. I think that there's some significant investigations going on, and they'll try and find out. But we can see, for instance, I know that the material that was mailed out to Spain, we've already seen Victoria Nuland and other American officials jump on the bandwagon and say that, and blame Russia. That seems to be, possibly one of the motivations behind this is to create a provocation that further hardens the European resolve against Russia. Maybe the Spanish were flagging, and so somebody decided that they're going to do this to get the Spaniards enraged against the Russians to continue to support the war in Ukraine. Who knows? It's too early to say.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. Audrey's a regular viewer. I recognize her. Tomorrow night, the Time Person of the Year, Scott Ritter, will be at the Bethlehem Public Library in Del Mar. Your hometown show. Extra security tomorrow. Will Maverick be on the scene? Anything special since it's your hometown?
I think Voldemort will be there with the Death Eaters, and anybody who Anybody who comes at me is going to have to get through that security. And I'm here to tell you right now, you don't want to mess with Voldemort.
No, definitely not. That would be extremely unwise. And thank you, Tori, who's been looking at me with the look of love like never before. But you know what? She's only human, and it was inevitable. So we'll see where this goes. And good luck with your cough. I hope you get through the talk tomorrow night. And we'll be back on Tuesday and Friday next week. And Ann is also hiding out backstage. Thanks, Ann. Great to have you on board with us. Thank you, Scott. I hope you feel better.
Wait, don't cut me off yet.
No, I would never do that. What do you want to say, sir?
I want to say thank you, Tori, and I want to say thank you, Ann, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's been supporting us throughout this thing. I've been accused of being a little cold towards the people that make this happen, so I'm trying to rectify my error, but it's done sincerely. I truly do appreciate Tori, Ann, and all those, including you, Jeff, who have made.
The dangerous man in the leather jacket? Is that who you're referring to, Mr.
I
Danger?
am referring to the dangerous man in the leather jacket who drinks blended Californian wine.
Who said that you weren't expressing enough appreciation? Would that be Voldemort?
No, Maverick.
Oh, Maverick. Okay. No, well, I don't feel unappreciated, but thank you for the extra acknowledgement, and to whomever encouraged you to say it. Thank you. All right. But next week, that's really the time to get all sentimental, because that's the last.
Yeah, next week will be tough.
We'll be in tears. We'll be crying, hugging, kissing.
Crying.
Yeah.
We'll be doing the simulated hugs.
Yeah.
It'll be very, very tough.
Yeah. All right. So let's pace ourselves. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Scott and Tori and Ann and everybody who watched and everybody who contributed. Thank you so much. Take care.